All right, so we're going to continue the tutorial that's sort of like hoping to prepare you for making stuff for NanoGenmo. And the way that we're going to do this, I'm just going to take you through a couple of Jupyter notebooks that have some Python code that I think will be helpful, either as like the start of your actual production work. Like I think you can start using the code in these notebooks even to just like straight up generate a novel or just to like get the juices in your brain going about some of the techniques that are open to you. So I think what we're going to do first, I linked to in the syllabus, which maybe I should bring up here. In the schedule, I linked to like a whole bunch of different text generation tutorials. The main one that I want to get through is this corpus-driven narrative generation one. So I think that's the one that we're gonna. This is also like the most difficult to get running. So I think we'll do this one first, and then go back to these ones up above at the end of the session if we have enough time. So that's what we're gonna do. So again, with this notebook, what I was sort of hoping you would have done by today is go through this enough Python notebook, which kind of like doesn't teach you Python, but kind of gives you the lay of the land. Would it be helpful to go through this first super quickly? Okay, so I'll try not to take more than like 5 to 10 minutes on going through this, because we're not gonna have time to like teach you Python from the ground up, but it'll be good to show you just how the basics work. So this again is Jupyter Notebook. It has like little cells. If you double click on them, you can edit them once you've downloaded them to your computer, right? And then you can run the cells. You run the cells by doing Shift Enter. Shift Enter will run the cell and then move on to the next cell, or Control Enter will just run the cell in place. There's also like you can copy and paste cells and stuff like that up here in this menu, which can be useful. And you can always create a new cell directly underneath the current one by pressing B, or cell, or what is it, insert cell below, and then type in your own Python expressions there. So the basic thing about Jupyter Notebook is you type in a Python expression or a series of Python statements, and then hit Control Enter, and then right beneath the cell, it shows the result of evaluating that expression. So 4 plus 8 is a Python expression. This is a more complicated Python mathematical expression, and Python math expressions look just like they do in JavaScript. This assigns a variable, so x equals 4 plus 5 creates a new Python variable that's a part of your Jupyter Notebook session and assigns this value to it. And then later in the notebook, you can use that variable name with the value that you previously assigned to it, right? The important thing to remember is that it's not the visual order of the cells that matters in terms of whether or not a variable is available or the current value of that variable. It's the order in which you executed the cells, right? So if up here I change this, what would be a good example of doing that? If up here I change this to like x equals 10 plus 2, and then ran this cell down here, it's still going to have the same value. That's because I didn't run this cell yet to update the value of x, right? So you have to like run the cells in order to get that stuff to take place. That's actually, it's sort of confusing at first that you can do things out of order, but that's actually what makes the notebook interface powerful, because you can have like down here like a little bit of code that you just want to run and be able to run all the time, and then use that value up previously in the notebook before you do the work of like putting it all back together. In this tutorial, we're mainly going to be working, or today during this session, we're mainly going to be working with the string data type. So strings in Python look like this. They're in between double quotes. You can assign them to variables. This code right here, text equals open frost.txt.read. This reads in a text file and puts it into a string, so it just reads the whole thing in. In this case, it's not going to work. It says no such file or directory frost.txt. And I should have linked this from the notebook itself, But if you want to get frost.txt, what's the easiest way to make this available? If you do rwt.decontextualize.com/texts/frost.txt, here's Robert Frost. Actually, a better version of this. This is where I wish there was just like a magical way to beam a link to everyone in the room. It feels like that should be possible. Maybe I'll add this to the syllabus really quick. Yeah, so let me add this to the syllabus really quickly. You can see, you'll be able to see how I add stuff to the syllabus. So maybe that'll be educational. That's the right directory. Schedule.md. I keep the syllabus as a markdown file. And then here in session 10, where did it go? So the problem with markdown is like it's visually impenetrable, so you always lose your place. We'll add it right here. Plain text example files. That's going to rerun the generation process. Localhost 4000. Check it. Schedule. Session 10. That link goes to the right place. We're good to go. And then deploy it to the website. Can probably reverse engineer the audio from this to determine what my password is. That's fine. Hack into my website, delete all of my precious syllabi. Okay, so now that should be in the syllabus. So a helpful file to work with. I like small poems as a way to illustrate some of these concepts. So if you scroll down to session 10 and reload the page, there's now this link to plain text example files. And this might be a good exercise just to do this again. So what I'm going to say is like, you can actually pick one of these files. I'm going to say pick frost.txt here. So if you want to download this, you could just like download this whole repository as a zip file and then unzip it in the same directory if you wanted to. I'm just going to download frost.txt to start with. And again, on GitHub, you can click on raw and then do file, save page as, find the directory where you have your Jupyter notebooks. You can see that's what's going on right there. And then click on save. And now you should see in the Jupyter Notebook home directory that frost.txt, right? And then when you run this cell in the enough Python notebook, it should not give an error message anymore. How did that go for people? Okay. So if you just want to see what's in a string, you can just put the variable there and it shows the stuff that's happening in it. You can see that this is just like the raw text. It has these \n's in there, which are, those stand in for new lines, for line breaks. If you want to actually interpret those line breaks as line breaks when it displays it, you can use the print function in Python. So if you do print and then put a string in there, instead of like displaying the new lines as \n, it actually displays them as line breaks. Dot upper converts a string to lowercase or to uppercase. There are a bunch of other functions like this that manipulate strings, and I'm not going to talk about all of them, but if you do a web search for like Python string methods, there's like a whole bunch of them that might be helpful. One that we're going to look at in particular is dot split, which splits a text up into words just by breaking on white space. So this gives you a list of all of the words. This is the Python data type is called a list. It's like an array in JavaScript. all of the words as they were separated by white space. You can do the same thing, separating it out into lines by doing \n as the separator in the split command. This is helpful if you have a text file that is like a database of lines of text that you got from somewhere else. There will be a handful of instances where we might be working with something like that. So you can get a list of words like that, assigns the list to a variable. This tells us there are 144 words in that text. Hi. So this tells us that there are 144 words in the text, and this shows us that there are 24 characters in that string called message that I made all the way back up. So the len function tells you how long something is. In JavaScript, you usually do that with like dot length up to the variable name, but in Python, you do it with the len function. Another thing that we'll see a lot in these examples is indexing lists or strings, and you do that with square brackets after the variable name. And then in between there is some expression that evaluates to an integer that tells you which index to grab from. So this is saying 2 is the 0th element of this list, or the first word of the text, 2 roads diverge in a yellow wood. Yellow is the 5th word. This expression can be anything, not just a number that you write, as long as it evaluates to an integer. So this gives us the word index 7. And then this is the indexing that you don't see in JavaScript. This is called range notation in Python. This gets us the words in the list from 2 up to but not including 7. So it gives us a slice of the list. That gives us these 5 words that are in that position. This is like super, super helpful. This is like probably my favorite feature of Python. If you were doing this in JavaScript, the equivalent expression would be something like you would type words dot, and then you would be like, I forgot how to do this in JavaScript. And then you'd like look up like mdn array slice. And then you'd look at this and slice from begin to end and not included, so it would be this weird thing, words.slice to 7. I assume would do the same thing in JavaScript, but you can see how the Python notation is. I think it's more clear. It's also like more succinct. This gives you everything up to the item at index 8. And if you use a negative index, then it starts counting from the end instead of from the beginning, which is also really helpful. So this gives me the last 8 words of the text. And I'm showing this to you not because I'm expecting you to like remember this exactly necessarily, but just so that when you see this in the other notebooks that we're going to work on, you'll be able to kind of remember like, oh, I remember that was indexing, that was slicing. Maybe you don't remember exactly what it was, but you remember that this is the part of the notebook where I showed you how it worked, so you can go back and look it up or know the right words to Google when you're looking for help. You can also use the same indexing on strings. So this was on a list of words. This is just on a string itself. So when I say message 4 to 14, it gives me everything from the 4th character up to the 14th character of that string. Other things to be able to recognize. This is how you make a new list, and then you can add things to it with the append method. In JavaScript, this method is called push. In Python, it's called append. So this will append each one of these things to the end of the list. So at the end, this is just to say I have eaten in it. Right? This will be very common in the examples where you start off with a list. Maybe that list is empty to begin with, and then in a for loop, push new items onto that list in order to create a new list. The join method takes a list of items like this and then glues them back together using this string right here. So this is like a weird looking syntax, but it's basically taking whatever this string is and then putting it in between each item of the list. So I could change this actually. I could change this to like, let's do like American flag. Make this like a super patriotic rendition of Evelyn Carlos Williams, right? So this can be anything, right? It's just gluing together the string with this list of strings with this string. And a lot of the examples that we're going to do basically boil down to take a text file, split it apart somehow, and then glue it back together in a different way. So we dissect it and then taxidermy it is kind of what's going on. And these are the simplest forms of dissection, is just splitting a list or splitting a string into words. And the simplest form of textual taxidermy is gluing it back together with the join function. If you just put an empty string there with nothing in between the quote marks, it just smushes it all together without any spaces. Couple more things. Random numbers are going to be very useful in this process. Random numbers are the thing that lets you make different variations on different patterns. Python has a couple of ways to do that. One is the random module. So the import word in Python says, bring in this library, and so we can use it in the program. It's sort of like including that script line in JavaScript. The random library is built in. Random.choice will take a list and then return a random item from it, like that. Random.sample will take a list and give you n items from it selected at random without replacement. So this gives me 5 random words from the text. And this could be like, if you had some text you were working with and you just wanted to make your NaNoGenMo novel this way, by just taking the text and then sampling 50,000 words from it, we could do that. This will give me an error because there aren't 50,000 words in Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken. But that's the way that you get a random sample from it. And then you can get a random number a random integer between 0 and this number by doing that. So this, if you get nothing else away from, if you take nothing else away from this, at least have this one line of Python code, which you can use at your D&D night if you forget your D20. This emulates a D20, a dice with 20 sides, for those of you not initiated. Questions about any of this so far? Again, I'm just like trying to take you through the basic stuff, like the most common idioms that we're going to look at in these notebooks. Doesn't explain everything, but I'm hoping that it's going to give you just like enough knowledge that you will have some stuff to hang on to when you're looking at the code examples. I think this is the last section of this notebook. Yes. Who wants to?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I have a question about the beginning, where we were using words and message, len words, len message. It says that it's not defined.
Yeah, so you have to make sure that you're executing all of the cells. So one thing that's helpful to see is, like, if you look at this number, it shows you what order that cell was executed in. So this was the 13th item that I executed. It also confusingly saves this. So like when you download this notebook, it has the record of me running it before I uploaded it. But make sure that you run that cell so that the variable is.
If I do it in the wrong order in the beginning, I have to restart it and do it.
No, you can just go through and find the cell and then execute it and then scroll back down and you should be fine. If you get like totally lost about which variables are defined, then a good like restarting and then executing again in order might be a good strategy. But in this case, you can just like go back up to where that variable is defined and then run the cell. Yeah, just make sure that you've executed all the cells. So the words array is defined right here where it says, or the words list where it says assign a list to a variable like so. So make sure you've executed that line. Sure.
Once we save raw text version of a notebook, how do we run our version of it?
So it should be in your Jupyter Notebook homepage right there. if it has, it's probably named enough python.ipynb.txt. You have to get rid of that .txt extension.
We have to sign up for Jupyter Notebook, right?
You have to download Anaconda. Did you not do that yet?
I have.
Have you launched Jupyter Notebook?
I didn't know it. I did an application.
Yeah, so there's an application called Anaconda Navigator. Launch that and then launch Jupyter Notebook. Okay, so last thing that I want to explain in just the Python overview is loops and comprehensions. So a lot of the times what you're doing with data in Python, again, is turning it into a list of things, and then you want to do something to every item in that list. Maybe you want to convert everything to uppercase, or maybe you want to exclude lines of text that are greater than a particular length, or things like that. So that idea of taking one list, transforming it into another list is very common. So for example, this code takes 3 random items from that list, joins them together, and then prints that item out. Sorry, I talked about this out of order. Another thing that you might want to do is do the same thing multiple times. The way to do the same thing multiple times in Python is with a for loop, and a for loop looks like this. You say for I in range 10, this will do this code 10 times. When you're putting something into a for loop, make sure to always have like a print in there or something that's like appending to a list. So here I just have I'm making a very simple generative text procedure that just selects 3 words at random from the text. If I wanted to do that 10 times, I could just copy that code, tab it over once, and then put it under this line for I in range equals 10, or range 10, and then it will do that 10 times. If I wanted to do that 50,000 times to have a novel, or so that I ended up with 50,000 words, there are 3 words per line, so I would do this 50,000 divided by 3 times. It won't let me do that because this has to be an integer, so just convert this to an integer. So now it did that enough times that I would end up with 50,000 words, plus or minus 3 words, and then I'm done with the assignment, right? This isn't like a great iteration, but yeah, that's one way to do it. I think a lot of the solutions that we're going to come up with will be something like this, where you have a small generative procedure that you know works, and then you have some way to repeat it enough times to take up space and maybe introduce some variations in the repetition. But this is just to show you how the for loop works. This is another example that's just showing how to print the squares of the integers from 0 to 10, not including 10. Right? So I is the loop variable, and then you can do whatever you want to with the loop variable inside. If you're familiar in JavaScript with the for of loop, which is where you iterate over a loop with assigning each item of the loop to a temporary variable, that's how all Python for loops operate. So in this syntax, what it's doing is iterating over all of the words in this list of words, assigning them to a temporary loop variable item, and then printing out each one of those along with its length. So it's just like showing how long each one of these words is. This is just a demonstration of the for loop. So in Python, there's no for let I equals 0, I is less than words.length, I plus plus, like this whole nonsense here. You just write it like this. And then finally, like I was talking about before, one of the main things that you may want to do with loops and lists in Python is filtering and transforming a list. So for example, let's say that we wanted to make a new text from this Frost poem that only includes the words that have the letter T. or that start with the letter T, and then it converts them all to uppercase. To do that, you might write a for loop that looks like this, where you're iterating over every item in the words list, checking to see if the item starts with T. The if statement mostly works the same in Python as it does in JavaScript. This converts that expression to uppercase and then appends it to this new list. So you start with an empty list, and then you fill this up gradually with stuff from the other list, and then you end up with something that looks like, like this. This is not especially aesthetically interesting. It's mildly aesthetically interesting, but not especially aesthetically interesting. But it's just a demonstration of like a common thing to do with lists and loops, right? In Python, there's an alternate way of writing this called the list comprehension that sort of takes this entire for loop and then rearranges it to be a single expression. So this is the list comprehension version of that. Whenever in Python you see like an open square bracket, a closing square bracket, and the words for and in and if inside of there, it's a list comprehension. And this is basically rearranging the items, rearranging the code from up here, where it's doing the same check, it's doing the same operation here to each item, but doing it all in the same line. It's shorter. I think it's a little bit easier to read. It's not as versatile as doing it in a for loop, but I use it extensively in the examples. So again, I'm just showing this to you like so that you'll have some terminology when you're looking at the example code to understand what's happening and have like at least the first step in mind when you're looking through the code. Questions about any of that so far?
One small
Sure.
question. Once we downloaded it, if you don't want to open it as a plain text, what do we?
So after you've launched Jupyter Notebook, you should have a screen that looks like this, and then you will have made a directory to store your notebooks in. Okay.
But they're appearing as text, not cells.
Yeah, so if you downloaded that and it's called like, once you've downloaded the notebook, if it shows up as enoughpython.ipymb.txt, is that where you are?
Yeah.
Then click on it in this interface and click on, oh, I can't rename it while it's running, but there will be a rename option up here. Rename it and just get rid of the .txt. Keep the .ipymb, but get rid of the
I was
.txt.
thinking that it's inside the Finder, that's why I was in the
No, you can do it in the Finder too, but you have to keep the .ipymb.
Yes.
Other questions about the stuff in this notebook? Again, it's okay if you didn't like 100% understand that. Just let the terminology like wash over you. The other thing, if you're not familiar with Python, is that it doesn't use curly brackets for blocks of code. Instead, it uses indentation. So the way that if I were writing this code in JavaScript, it would look something like, let t words equal that for let item of words, and then I would have curly brackets like that, right? And then this if would be like with curly brackets around that also. In JavaScript, it keeps track of which statements go together, which statements belong to a particular syntactical structure, like an if statement, like a for loop, using curly brackets. And then the spacing you have to do yourself. In Python, the spacing is mandatory, and it doesn't use curly brackets because all of that syntactic information is contained in the indentation. So you have to be careful about that in Python. You know that these two lines are part of the if statement simply because they're indented over underneath that if statement. And you know that this whole thing is inside of the for loop because it's indented underneath the for loop. And we'll see more of this as it goes on, but that's just something to know. Oh, and another thing that I didn't put inside of this is that a line that begins with a pound symbol, that's how you make your comment. So that code will just be ignored. Anything from the pound sign up to the end of the line. Cool. All right, so let's download the the corpus-driven narrative generation notebook. We'll go for like maybe another 15, 20 minutes and then take a break. So again, the way to download these, click on it in the GitHub repository, click on raw, and then do file, save page as, find the directory with the rest of your notebooks, and then click on save. And then again, it should show up in your Jupyter Notebook homepage. You may have to, again, get rid of the .txt ending on it, but that's the easiest way to download these things that I know of. So now I'm going to run that notebook by just opening it up. Might take a second to load, but then there it is. So what we're going to do in this notebook, oh, I need you to download actually another file. So go back here. The other file that I want you to download is, I should have put this link to it directly. So if you click on just this GitHub repository, so click on corpus-driven narrative generation here, click that right there. It's going to take you to the homepage for that repository. The other thing I want you to download is this romcom plot sentences.tsv. So just as like an example, I've prepared 4 megabytes of sentences from romantic comedies, from summaries of romantic comedy plots, from a corpus that is called the Wikiplots corpus, which is some researchers at Georgia Tech, I think, Mark Riedel's group, scraped all of Wikipedia for plot summaries of anything that looked like a movie or a television show or a play, and then made those available to download. I prepared this corpus looking specifically for things that were romantic comedies just because I thought it would be an interesting corpus to use for this tutorial. If you're interested in working with this corpus, you're of course welcome to. I can also show you how to get all of the Wikiplots corpus or all of the Wikiplots corpus for a different genre. But basically what I want to do with this tutorial is work with a lot of data, like a lot of narrative data, and see if we can tease structure out of it. Yes, you're going to download this, so I'm going to do File, Save Page As, and again, just put that in the same directory as your notebooks. And then that should show up again here in the thing. Did Chrome add a .txt to that too? If it did, then get rid of the .txt. Okay, so now in this loading the corpus thing, you should be able to run this cell. Again, almost all of the time, if it worked, then it won't display anything, which is kind of counterintuitive. It only displays something if there's an error, but this line basically loads in that whole TSV file. TSV, if you're not familiar, is a way of exporting a spreadsheet so that other programs can read it. It's like a data interchange format for spreadsheets. And in this case, this TSV file has 28,000 lines, 28,000 or almost 29,000 sentences from rom-com plot summaries, along with the title of the romantic comedy that it came from, the total number of sentences in the summary, and the position of that sentence inside of the summary. So it tells you all of that information in there, and now we have that inside of Python. Questions about any of that?
It's generating individual sentences, right? It's not mixing different items together.
Not yet. So what we're working with right now is just a corpus that I prepared for this workshop. Oh, I just added that because I wanted to know how many sentences were in there. Yeah, sorry.
I was trying to figure
Yeah, I put stuff, some new stuff in there. Other questions about this so far?
So the line is like going through each row.
Yeah, so this
Or
is,
it's-
yeah,
I'm
this
just trying
is,
to like think of it as
Mhm.
like I don't know if it's like the comparison to like a CS working with like a CSV or something.
it's exactly that.
Okay.
A TSV and a CSV are the same thing, except in a CSV, the fields are separated with commas. In a TSV, they're separated with tabs. Just TSVs are sometimes easier to work with because you can see in our original, in this corpus, that there are a lot of, oh, that's weird. That's just happened to be the first comma that I saw. There's a lot of commas in the data itself. So it's harder to parse this if we saved it as CSV because we would have to like escape those commas. There are no tabs in the data itself, so saving it as TSV just makes it easier to parse the data. So that's why I did it that way. So yeah, that line there is just splitting each one of those, or reading each line from that TSV, splitting them apart by tabs, and then making a big list of those sentences in, this is called a Python dictionary. It's like a JavaScript object. So we have a field for title, index, total, and text.
So this strip is what is taking each line.
This is the thing that is actually taking each line. So if you open the file and you put it where it's expecting the thing to iterate over, it iterates over every line in the text.
So I guess, so yeah, what does the strip do?
Strip gets rid of the new line character at the end of the line.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, this like technically, if you looked at the code, there would be like a new line character there. Strip just gets rid of that. Whoops, I keep on flipping back to the wrong notebook. So what I like to do when I've just loaded in a big corpus is use the random.choice function just to grab me an item at random from the corpus, just so that I can kind of see what's happening inside of there. Okay, so here's a very typical line from a romantic comedy. In a movie called Getting Married, which I don't think I've ever heard of, there's a text: he has learned that he may be liable for his wife's debts, which presumably instigates some other action. It tells us also that there are 27 sentences total in that plot summary, and this is the 16th sentence. I can grab a few more of those. Questions about that?
So what
so far?
happens as you're clicking random choice over and over again? It's saving those?
No,
choices?
it's just
No.
picking one and
You're
then
just going through a list and
yeah.
trying to sum up.
and then just showing one at random. And this isn't, yeah, so this isn't like a generative process yet. This is just me looking at the data. I don't want to look at all 29,000 items. I just want to see, to make sure that it loaded the data correctly. Okay, so now we get to another weird, complicated part. The thing that I want to do now is like be able to extract information from these lines of rom-com summaries. So I want to be able to say like, who are the characters in these rom-coms? Like, what are the names in here? What are the places in here? What are the overall actions, like maybe the verbs and the adjectives in different parts of these things? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at something called natural language processing, and I'm just going to show you the basics of how it works. But in order to do this, you're going to need to install a library called Spacey. I don't think, yeah, so this process is going to be like awful, just to like let you know. So what I need you to do at this point is open up a terminal window, and I think we're all on Macs here, and that will make it easier. So open terminal, or if you use a different terminal emulator, you can open that too. The easiest way to do that is just use Spotlight and then type in terminal, or you can find it in the applications directory. So run terminal, I already have it running. And then inside of terminal, what you're going to do is type exactly what it has here in the notebook in the installation instructions. So conda install -c conda forge spacey. Copy that.
It's running Jupyter now. So I just
Oh yeah, so open a new tab. You're right. When you launch the terminal, it'll start a new thing. So then do shell new tab to open up like an actual prompt. Yeah, no, that's a good catch. So paste in that conda install -c conda forge spacey and then hit enter. I'm not going to hit enter up here because I already have it installed, and I'm afraid of what Anaconda will do if I tell it to install it again, and I have more work to get done today. So, but you should hit enter on that, and then it should say, like, solving packages for a second, and then show, like, a list of things that it's going to install, and then ask for a prompt. Hit yes at that prompt. And then when you're done with that, it should hopefully say like spacey successfully installed or something like that. Go to the next line underneath here, Python -m spacey download core web sm. I don't know why I picked sm. Yeah, we'll just do that for now. You can download the medium language model later. So paste that one in there as well and also hit enter. And that's going to ask for a different, I don't remember if that one asks for a prompt, but that's going to install a different thing that will let spacey work.
I just failed.
What did it say?
Failed, but it's trying again. Failed with
Okay.
initial frozen solve. Retrying with flexible solve.
Okay. How is that? Is the flexible solve working?
It's spinning.
Okay. Did you download Anaconda? Yeah, if it says command not found, then maybe you didn't finish installing it. I was wondering if it says invalid choice, then you might have pasted in the second command before the first one finished. So just like backspace and then hit Y instead.
It said failed with repo data from current repo data JSON. We'll try the next source.
That's scary.
Okay, so it's done.
It said done?
Yeah.
Did it? Let me see.
Okay.
Sorry
so
for those of you watching the screen.
it looks right. Right? That's what I
At least the
That
first
does
one.
look right.
Yeah. It
So
just said
it
done
does
and
need
it
proceed, so hit Y.
Alright.
Okay. How's that going for other people?
It's trying the flexible solve.
Okay.
So it's gonna work in the end. It just said done in the end.
There was a period of Python programming where everybody was using the same packaging system, and everybody had started distributing binaries of their packages. And this part of the tutorial was like super smooth, but nothing good lasts in this world. And so yeah, when that's done, you should be back at your prompt. My prompt is the kitty emoji, but yours is probably something else. And then type this download command, or paste it in. When all of that is finished, you should be able to run this next line where it says import spacey and have that work. It's going to take a second to load, but it should work after that. Or by work, I mean it shouldn't print out an error. If it prints out an error, then there's a problem and we'll have to debug that. Who's having trouble?
Mine's just still spinning.
It's still spinning? Okay. Give it a second to spin. Did it get past the, is it still on the flexible solve?
Yeah, it's still on the flexible.
Okay. You technically don't. You can pip install it, but it's slightly easier to use Conda to install it. And in our case, the main reason that we're using Anaconda is to make the Curious stuff later in this notebook easier to do. Otherwise, I would just do everything with pip. But also for a long time, Spacey didn't distribute binaries over pip, but they did over Conda. So.
I just want one of pip or Conda to eat the other.
Yeah, I want to too. I have a friend that works on Python packaging, and I complain to her about this all the time. And she's like, yes, I know. Wait for which?
run the.
This one, no, run it in the notebook.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did you get the something about conflicts and then it worked after that?
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
I can see.
It's just like,
This can take several minutes. That's weird. Did you have Anaconda installed before? Okay. If that's the case, then yeah, if you have other stuff installed, Anaconda takes forever sometimes to figure out.
Well,
what it
mine
needs to
didn't say conflicts, but it said fail.
do. Yeah. So if that is giving me hives to look at. If it doesn't work, so if you are trying to install this and it's just like you can't make it happen, the if you go back to the syllabus, just as a last resort, and I don't necessarily recommend this because there's some drawbacks to it, but in the syllabus I linked to the binder version. The binder version is basically a copy of that notebook running on a cloud server that already has all of the dependencies installed. So you can skip this process. The drawback of that is that the binder server will shut down after like 20 minutes if it's idle, and it doesn't save your work by default anywhere. So you have to be like super careful with working when you're working with it. But it will at least let you like get through the rest of this tutorial if this installation stuff isn't working. Right. How many success stories do we have so far?
oh, it looks like it's going.
Okay.
Something's happening.
So I'm just going to I want to take a break in like another 15 or another 10 minutes. But I don't want to spend. I would rather help with the installation issues while we're taking the break. Maybe it'd be better just to take the break now.
It seems.
Okay.
And once we
Right.
run that cell, if there is no error option, then we're good, right?
Yeah, if you run that cell and nothing displays underneath, then you're good to go. Yeah, so let's take the break now. I'm going to stop the video, and this will be part 1, and then we'll just take a 10-minute break. I'll come around and help people with the install, and then we'll get back to the notebook.